We have a different question from a different Jennifer this time around.
What are some ways we can help others work through their emotional clutter?
Now, I will say this, Susan, and quite often what we try to do is fix others because we're terrified of looking inward and noticing what is wrong with us. And then, of course, every judgment, you talk quite a bit about judgment in your book. Our judgments are merely insecurities that we're sort of projecting toward others. It's a mirror I'm holding up of my own insecurities.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I want to be careful. One thing is, sometimes someone will come to you and they need help with their emotional clutter, right? and you can certainly help them. And I think one way we already talked about today is by seeing them. That seems to be the main way to help someone.
Yeah. So let me kind of step back in terms of ourselves and then apply to others. So if we strip back all of the research, all of the work on emotional health, what we find is that there are two core components of emotional health. When we're dealing with difficult emotions, difficult situations, there are two core components. The first is going to difficult emotions. This is the showing up. This is the compassion. This is the curiosity. Like, what is this emotion signposting? So going to emotions is essential for emotional health and emotional well-being. Very often people try to bypass that. They try to jump to solution. They try to jump to outcome. They have short-term fix-its that they try to do. Well, I feel, unhappy in this relationship, therefore I'm just going to leave the relationship. But actually sometimes it's the avoidance of the work and the real conversation that needs to happen. And so it feels like a quick fix solution, but actually it's not. It's actually a perpetuation of the problem. So going to emotions is critical to emotional health and well-being. This includes some very practical things that I'll talk about a little bit later if we have time. And the other part of it is going through emotions. And what I mean by going through is about moving beyond this is what this value is signposting. It's signposting that I need more intimacy and connection. Okay, so what is that then asking you to do? It's asking you in your life to put down your cell phone and to actually hug your partner. It's actually asking you to make choices that are values connected. So this is not about we in our heads, we're going through emotions. Is about being able to connect with our values in our daily choices. Because every single day we have hundreds of what I call choice points. I want to be healthier. Like a choice point might be, do I eat the chocolate cake or do I eat the fruit? Like that is a very practical choice point, but we all have them in ways that connect with our values. And so going through is about connecting more consistently with choice points that are values aligned. So this is what emotional health looks like for ourselves. When it comes to others, we know that the same is true going to and going through. This often means that we need to actually really subordinate the other person. To what you were talking about earlier, going to emotions is actually about not trying to jump in and fix and go through and I've got a solution to your problem. The most important part of being able to support other people is in the going to. There are fascinating studies showing that if you've got a child who is throwing a tantrum on the floor of CVS, your impetus might be to jump in and reason with the child. But there is actually very beautiful research just showing that the presence of someone who loves you and cares about you and who's able to be with you, just that presence de-escalates the intensity of your emotional experience and allows you to move from a stage where you're stuck inside the jar of the emotion to being able to step out of the jar and kind of read what's in the jar. So that sabobone is, I think, the most important aspect of supporting other people through emotions. What's really important with this is that we spoke earlier about brooding, and there is a phenomenon known as co-brooding. Okay. So co-brooding is when you go out with your best friend and you have a big fat bitch for like 3 hours about your father-in-law. And you like moaning and moaning and moaning and moaning and moaning. And both of you are like, blah, 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 and isn't he terrible? And you're going on about it.
Yeah.
And what happens is so interesting, which is you leave that interaction loving your best friend even more. She gets me. She understands me. He gets me. He understands me. But when you actually go back into the situation with your father-in-law, you are more likely to act out, act poorly. In other words, that co-brooding is actually, when I'm talking about a sawubona, I'm not talking about getting stuck in the person's difficult emotions and difficult experiences. So how do we help them to move to the go through? You cannot move them. That's not your job. You can support them as they do it.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that we can do that is just by kind of helping them, even with simple things like helping someone to label their difficult emotions. So for example, someone who says, I'm stressed. Okay, I'm stressed, which is a very common, when we are struggling, very often we say we're stressed. But there is a world of difference between stress and disappointment, stress and feeling unsupported, stress and that gnawing feeling of you in the wrong job or the wrong career. And so when someone is like stuck in a difficult emotion and they're just saying, I'm stressed, as a friend, helping them to kind of unpick, sometimes it feels like it's this actually about support. Or it feels like this is about disappointment. What that is called psychologically is it's called emotion granularity. And emotion granularity is a psychological superpower. Like talk about getting uncluttered, talk about whatever. We often use these big umbrellas to talk about what we're feeling. But when we become more nuanced and we say it's this, there are these crayons in the box and I keep on drawing on the blue crayon, but actually what I'm feeling is pink. Emotion granularity, asking yourself, I'm saying it's stress, but what are two other options, is one of the most profound ways that we start getting a level of insight and clarity. And as a friend, we can support people with insight and clarity.
That's an amazing question. Like when someone releases an emotion or talks about an emotion, you can ask them like, what are two other words to describe that emotion? That'll help them dig a little bit deeper. That's a great support mechanism.
I was working with a client who would often describe, he would say he's angry. And he would say like, I'm angry, my team's angry. I'm angry, my team's angry. And I started saying to him like, what are two other options? And he started saying, actually, I'm not angry. I'm actually scared. I'm actually scared about this job. And my team's not angry. My team's actually mistrusting. Now, you can see if you go into a conversation where you're angry and your team's angry, it's a very different conversation than I'm scared and my team's looking to build trust.
Completely different.
Completely different.
Yeah.
And when you come home from work and you seeing your wife as angry versus the person's needing support or the person's just tired, very different conversation. It literally shifts. And emotion granularity, when I call it a superpower, what I mean is that in longitudinal studies, we know that children who are as young as 2 and 3 years old, who are able to more accurately label their emotions, moving beyond just mad and sad in terms of being more nuanced, literally over longitudinal studies, 10, 20, 30 years, have higher levels of mental health and well-being, greater ability to delay gratification. And you can see why this is. If someone says to a 16-year-old, hey, I've got this great idea, like, let's do drugs together. On the one hand, the child wants acceptance and connection, and that social contagion is starting to play in. But a child that's more granular with their emotions is able to say, this looks exciting, but there's something that feels wrong here. And the child who's able to connect in with that is then able to move forward with those values.
Did you enjoy this standalone Patreon highlight? If so, you can listen to full episodes of the Minimalists private podcast available exclusively on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/theminimalists or click the link in the description. Your support keeps our podcast and YouTube channel 100% advertisement free.